If you believe that the greatest thing one human being can give to another is hope. Because today's story isn't about wealth, fame, or miracles. It's about a waitress barely getting by, who shared her tip jar with a struggling mother. And it's about a billionaire who happened to be watching. A man who thought he understood value, until he saw what it really looks like to give. So stay with us till the end, and you just might see how a handful of loose change became the turning point in someone's life. Let's begin. It was a bright Thursday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, the kind of day where the sunlight hit the highway just right, making the asphalt shimmer like it was trying to be something more than a road. Walter Breckman, age 66, sat at a booth near the window of Mel's Diner, a family-owned restaurant just off I-10, with his 6-year-old grandson Henry sitting across from him, legs swinging just above the tiled floor. Mel's wasn't the kind of place Walter usually found himself. The chairs were a little too worn, the menus laminated but curling at the corners, and the walls were filled with faded photographs of regulars, local ball teams, and sun-bleached Polaroids of people he didn't recognize. The coffee smelled burnt, and the floors creaked when someone walked by. It wasn't 5-star dining. It wasn't even 3. But it was real, and for once, that was the point. His daughter had insisted. "Take him somewhere normal, Dad," she said. "Let him see what simple looks like." Walter didn't argue, not because he agreed, but because he respected her. And part of him, a part buried beneath decades of luxury hotels, boardroom lunches, and catered events, remembered what it was like to eat somewhere your name wasn't known, where nobody treated you like a headline. Henry was busy coloring on the paper placemat, lost in a world of crayons and syrup bottles. Walter, meanwhile, sat back and observed the place. He was a man who noticed things. 50 years in logistics did that to a person. He could tell you how long it would take for the next delivery truck to pull up just by watching the server glance nervously toward the back. He could sense from the rhythm of the kitchen window that they were short a cook. The manager had a clipboard but hadn't used it in a while. It was more of a prop now. The waitress at the next table, in her late 20s maybe, had shoes that were too thin and a smile that was too genuine to be fake. She was moving fast, but she wasn't rushing. There was grace in it, even if she didn't know. Walter scanned the room. A couple at the counter argued quietly over a bill. A man in a work shirt dozed off over half-eaten meatloaf. A toddler dropped a spoon, and it clanged across the linoleum, startling Henry, who laughed. Walter cracked a small smile. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been somewhere so uncurated. Nothing in this place had been polished for him. And oddly, he liked that. The waitress approached. "Afternoon, folks," she said, pouring water into their glasses. Her name tag read Lila. "Menu's simple, but everything's made fresh. Specials are on the board." Walter nodded politely, but didn't look up from the menu. He wasn't rude, just focused. Numbers, ingredients, margins. He did the math without realizing. Pancakes, $6.95. Cost, probably under $1.40. Labor overhead, this place wasn't making much. But it was surviving. Barely. He glanced at Henry. The boy was happy. That was something. The last few months had been difficult for the family. His daughter's divorce, the changes at school, and Walter had stepped in more than once, not just with money but presence. He wasn't always good at that. But he was trying. Outside, the sun bounced off the parked cars, casting long shadows into the diner. Walter reached for his coffee, bitter, thin, and took a sip. He grimaced but didn't complain. He wasn't here for coffee. A bell jingled near the door. Walter's gaze instinctively followed the sound. A young woman stepped in, maybe in her early 20s, cradling a toddler on her hip. Her clothes were clean but wrinkled, her eyes alert but tired. She hesitated just inside the entrance, looking at the menu posted near the register. Lila noticed her too. Walter leaned slightly forward, watching. The woman walked up to the counter, asked a question Walter couldn't hear, and nodded quietly at the answer. She turned as if to leave, her face unreadable, but Lila called out gently. "Hey, hold up," the waitress said, and disappeared into the back. Walter watched the exchange, eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment, but in calculation. Something was happening here. Something he didn't yet understand, and that intrigued him. He folded his hands in front of him, elbows resting on the table. Henry tugged his sleeve. "Grandpa, do they have chicken tenders?" Walter smiled faintly. "I'm sure they do." But his attention was already drifting back, to the girl, the waitress, the woman with the child. To the way the room had shifted in that moment. To something stirring, low and quiet, beneath the surface of a very ordinary lunch at Mel's diner. Lila Thompson had been on her feet since 6:30 that morning. The morning shift at Mel's diner was always the tougher one. Truckers came in early, construction crews rolled through before the heat kicked up, and the coffee never stopped pouring. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And Lila took pride in doing it well, even if her back ached and the soles of her shoes were worn thin. At 28, Lila was used to stretching every dollar. She worked double shifts 4 days a week, sometimes 5 if a coworker called out. Her apartment, really a converted sunroom she shared with 2 roommates, wasn't much, but it was safe, and the rent was cheap. She packed leftovers from the diner for dinner and only turned the air conditioning on when the Arizona heat became unbearable. Every cent counted. Every tip mattered. So when she saw the young woman step into the diner, baby on her hip, something stirred in her. The girl looked no older than 23, dressed in an oversized hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. The child, maybe 2 or 3 years old, clung to her, sleepy-eyed and quiet. They hovered near the door like they didn't quite belong, eyes flicking toward the counter, then the menu, then the exit again. Lila moved toward them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hey there," she said gently. "You looking for something in particular?" The young woman smiled, nervous. "Just wondering how much for the kids' pancakes." "For 50, Lila replied, watching her carefully. The girl nodded, hesitating. She opened her purse, fingers fumbling through loose change, a crumpled bill, and a bus pass. Her shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly. "Thanks anyway," she murmured. "We'll just, maybe come back later." She turned to leave. And something in Lila broke. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was memory. She remembered what it felt like to wonder if there'd be dinner. She remembered holding a plastic bag of change and calculating groceries in her head. She remembered being the one turning away from a counter, ashamed but too proud to beg. She couldn't watch someone else carry that same weight, not if she could do something about it. "Wait," Lila called out. The woman stopped, halfway to the door. "Sit down. You're not leaving hungry. Not today." Lila turned and walked quickly toward the back, heart pounding not with doubt, but with decision. She went straight to the back counter where her tip jar sat tucked beneath the register, mostly unnoticed by anyone but her. It wasn't much. A slow morning. A few singles. Some quarters. But it was what she had. She unscrewed the lid and counted $11 and some change. She pulled out the bills, folded them once, and walked back to the front. The young mother was still standing by the door, unsure. Lila held out the cash. "This should cover pancakes and juice. Sit anywhere you'd like." The woman stared at her, stunned. "I can't take that," she said softly. "You're not," Lila replied. "You're just letting me buy breakfast for someone who needs it today. Happens all the time." It was a lie, but a kind one. Slowly, the woman nodded. She walked to a booth near the back and settled in with her child, who was already perking up at the sight of a menu. Lila returned with crayons and a paper placemat, like she would for any other kid. She smiled, jotted the order, and headed to the kitchen window. Behind her, a few customers had noticed. Someone muttered something under their breath. A couple of older ladies at a corner table exchanged glances. But Lila didn't care. She wasn't doing this for show. She delivered the food with the same care she gave any plate. She refilled the juice. She offered extra syrup. The child giggled. The mother cried quietly into a napkin when she thought no one was looking. Walter Breckman, sitting a few booths over, was looking. He hadn't missed a second of it. The air inside Mel's diner had shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the hush that falls over a church just before someone stands to speak. The usual clatter of silverware and low hum of conversation had quieted, and in that quiet, eyes turned. A few customers had seen what just happened, seen Lila take the cash from her own tip jar, hand it over without ceremony, and welcome the struggling mother and child like they were honored guests. Not everyone understood it. A man at the counter scoffed under his breath. "Putting on a show," he muttered, loud enough for the woman next to him to hear. She didn't respond. But her expression said she agreed. At a nearby booth, two teenage girls paused mid-bite, one raising an eyebrow, the other snapping a photo discreetly beneath the table. The moment had caught the room off guard, not because it was dramatic, but because it was uncomfortably sincere. People weren't used to seeing kindness so raw. Lila, for her part, said nothing more. She returned to her station, grabbing a rag and wiping down the counter as if nothing unusual had happened. She didn't check her tip jar again. She didn't look for approval. She just went back to work. The mother, now seated near the window, hunched low over the table, head bowed slightly. Her hands trembled as she helped her little boy with the syrup packet. She wasn't crying, not openly, but her eyes glistened, and she blinked a little too often. Every movement was careful, almost reverent, as if afraid that touching the food might make it vanish. The boy, no older than 3, dug into his pancakes with both hands. His cheeks were flushed, his smile sticky with syrup. He didn't speak, but the joy was all over his face. Pure. Innocent. Real. Across the diner, Walter Breckman hadn't moved. He sat still, fingers lightly laced together, elbows resting on the table in front of him. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, untouched. His eyes, sharp, calculating, trained by years of corporate negotiations and freight route optimizations, were fixed on one object, the empty tip jar beneath the register. It had only taken a second. A few crumpled bills. $11, give or take. But it might as well have been a fortune, the way it shifted the balance of the room. Walter could feel it, an invisible weight pressing against his chest, a question hanging in the air that he couldn't answer. He'd spent his life measuring value. Time, labor, investment, return. Every decision ran through a cost-benefit analysis. Every dollar earned had purpose, every risk calculated. But this didn't add up. There was no gain in what the waitress had done. No angle. No audience, aside from a few half-curious strangers. And yet, it had impact. You could see it in the way the mother clutched the napkin with both hands. In the way she said thank you with a bowed head instead of words. In the way the child looked at her with complete instinctive trust, as if, for this one meal, the world had become safe again. Walter leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. He felt something shift inside him. A memory, maybe. Or a mirror. He didn't know yet. The bell above the door jingled as another customer entered, and the noise stirred the diner from its spell. Conversations resumed, plates clattered, the world kept moving. But Walter didn't. Not just yet. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small notepad he always carried, and wrote something down. Just a name, Lila. He underlined it once, then closed the pad and tucked it away. He wasn't sure why. But something told him he would want to remember her. The diner had mostly emptied out by the time Lila wiped down the last table. The late lunch crowd had thinned into a soft lull, that quiet space between the rush and the dinner hour. Outside, the Arizona sun was still blazing, but the light filtering through the diner's dusty blinds had mellowed into something golden and soft. Lila stretched her back, feeling the familiar pinch between her shoulder blades. Her feet ached, her braid had loosened behind her neck, and a faint sweat line showed on her collar. She glanced at the register, tip jar empty, and smiled to herself. She didn't regret it. Not even a little. That mother and her child had finished every bite. The little boy had even looked up and waved a syrup-covered hand before they slipped out the side exit, like they were afraid someone might stop them from leaving with full bellies. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But Lila had seen the way the woman's shoulders had lowered, not in defeat, but in relief. That single moment of quiet safety had made the whole day worth it. "Lila," came a voice from the back, interrupting her thoughts. It was Don, her manager. He stood in the narrow hallway by the employee restroom, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He didn't sound upset, but there was a note in his voice she recognized, something between concern and preparation. "Mind stepping into the office for a minute?" She nodded and followed him, tossing the rag into the hamper on her way. The back office was barely a room, just enough space for a desk, a metal file cabinet, and 2 chairs that wobbled if you leaned too far left. The fan in the ceiling buzzed quietly, and a wall calendar hung crooked next to a stack of time cards. Don closed the door behind them and leaned against the desk, arms folded. "You already know what this is about, don't you?" he asked. Lila gave a small, tired smile. "Let me guess, it's about the $11. Don exhaled and nodded slowly. "Yeah. Look, I'm not here to scold you. You're one of the hardest workers I've got. Customers like you, the crew likes you, you always stay late when someone flakes. But..." Lila waited. "That tip jar is yours," Don continued. "It's not the store's money. You earn that. That's your extra. I just want to make sure you know, this ain't your burden. Feeding strangers, I mean." "I know," she said simply. "Do you?" he asked gently. "Because I've been watching you the last few weeks. You've given away coffee. You covered that couple's short tab last Friday. You gave the dishwasher your old boots when his split. I ain't saying it's wrong. Lord knows we need more people like you in this world, but this place can't run on kindness alone." Lila didn't argue. She'd heard it before. From past jobs. From old friends. Even from her mother once, back when her generosity had cost them more than either of them could afford. "I get it," she said after a moment. "But that mom today? She wasn't scamming. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She just didn't want her kid to go another day without a hot meal." She hesitated, then added more softly, "There were times I would have killed for someone to do for me what I did for her." Don's face softened. "I figured. You're not the kind of person who throws money around for show." "I'm not the kind of person who has money to throw around," she replied, and chuckled without humor. He smiled too, but his eyes remained thoughtful. "You're good people, Lila. You really are. And I'll never tell you not to care. I just want you to make sure you leave something for yourself. That's all." She nodded. "I'm fine, Don. Really." He looked like he wanted to say more, maybe about the world, maybe about how tired kindness could make you, but he stopped himself. He reached for a clipboard instead, pretending to check a schedule that didn't need checking. "You're off the clock. Go home, yeah." Lila stood, thanked him, and stepped out. The kitchen had gone quiet. The fryers were off. The coffee pots were rinsed. She grabbed her backpack from the hook near the break table, slung it over one shoulder, and stepped out into the Arizona heat. The sunlight hit her full in the face, warm and blinding. She squinted, pulling her braid over her shoulder to keep it off the back of her neck. Her bag was light. Her pocket even lighter. She did the math, $11 gone. That was groceries for 3 days if she stretched it. That was laundry, a tank of gas, part of the phone bill. Gone. But the ache in her chest was gone too. Replaced by something quieter. Steadier. Not pride exactly. She wasn't doing this for recognition, but peace. She crossed the lot toward the bus stop, passing a man pushing a shopping cart filled with bags and clothes. She didn't stare. Didn't turn away either. She just offered a small nod as she passed, and he nodded back. When she reached the stop, the bench was still warm from the sun. She sat, resting her elbows on her knees. Around her, cars sped down the freeway ramp, the noise distant, like the hum of a world always moving too fast. But for a moment, Lila wasn't rushing. Her day had been long. Her feet hurt. Her wallet was thin. But something about today felt right. She wasn't full. But she had enough. And for now, enough was everything. The next morning began like most others. The air in Phoenix was already warming before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, and Lila rode the early bus with the familiar drowsy quiet of second shifters and janitors heading home. She sipped burnt coffee from a paper cup and watched the city blur past her window, not expecting the day to be any different from the one before. When she arrived at Mel's diner, the parking lot was still half empty and the smell of bacon and fryer oil hadn't yet settled into the walls. She clocked in, tied on her apron, and moved behind the front counter with muscle memory more than enthusiasm. Her feet still ached from yesterday, but there was something steadying in the routine of it all. Sliced lemons, check coffee, reset sugar jars. Then she saw it. A small white envelope sat neatly on the corner of the counter, tucked just beneath the register bell. It wasn't sealed, just folded closed, and her name wasn't on it. Instead, a single line was written across the front in strong, slanted handwriting. To the waitress who gave more than she had. Lila stared at it for a moment, confused. It wasn't from Don. He always left post-it notes when he needed something. It wasn't a prank from Jesse in the kitchen either. He was more of a Sharpie on your apron kind of guy. This was different. Quiet. Intentional. She looked around. No one seemed to be paying attention. The dish boy was clanging trays in the back, and the cook hadn't even lit the grill yet. Lila picked up the envelope and gently unfolded it. Inside was a business card. Heavy stock, clean design. No embellishments, just a name, a company, a number. Walter Breckman. Breckman Freight Company. Her eyebrows lifted. She knew that name. Everyone in Arizona did. Breckman Freight was one of the biggest logistics firms in the Southwest. Their trucks ran up and down the I-10, and their name was etched into half the warehouses between Phoenix and El Paso. She turned the card over and found a small piece of paper tucked behind it. A handwritten note, short but direct. I'd like to talk. I believe we can help more mothers, together. That was all. Lila read it 3 times. Then a 4th. Her heart beat faster with each pass, not because she feared something bad, but because she had absolutely no idea what to make of this. Yesterday, she had handed $11 to a stranger because it felt right. She hadn't done it expecting recognition. She certainly hadn't done it thinking the richest man in the diner was watching. And yet, he had been. She remembered the older man, silver hair, tailored jacket, sharp eyes. He hadn't said a word. Hadn't even ordered dessert. But now, 24 hours later, he had left her something more personal than a tip. He'd left a possibility. Lila slipped the card and note back into the envelope and tucked it into the front pocket of her apron. She didn't say anything to anyone. Not yet. For the next hour, she poured coffee and greeted regulars and cleared crumbs from the booths like nothing was different. But everything was. All day, the envelope burned gently against her side, a quiet hum beneath her thoughts. What did he mean by help more mothers? Was this a job offer? A charity? A publicity stunt? She didn't know. But what she did know was that people like Walter Breckman didn't reach out unless they meant to follow through. And if there was even a chance that she could take what happened yesterday, that one small act of compassion, and do it again on a bigger scale, for more people like that mother and her little boy, then she had to at least hear him out. That evening, after her shift ended and the sky had turned to soft watercolor shades of orange and rose, Lila stood outside the diner and pulled the envelope from her apron pocket again. She ran her thumb over the ink of his name, steadying herself. The future had always felt like something far away, something she might never quite catch up to. But maybe, just maybe, it had come looking for her instead. The cafe Walter chose for their meeting wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, tucked away in a shaded plaza just far enough from the freeway to feel removed from the noise of the world. Lila showed up 10 minutes early, unsure what to expect. She wore her cleanest jeans and a simple blouse, hair pulled back, palms slightly damp with nerves. She wasn't used to meetings. She was used to orders, shifts, schedules. Walter was already there when she arrived. Seated by the window, nursing a small cup of tea and glancing occasionally out at the street. When he saw her, he stood and extended his hand. "Miss Thompson," he said warmly. "Thanks for coming." "You didn't really give me a reason not to," Lila replied with a smile, shaking his hand. He gestured for her to sit and waited until the server had taken their orders. Coffee for her, another tea for him, before leaning forward slightly, folding his hands over the table. "I saw what you did," he said simply. "At the diner." Lila gave a small shrug. It wasn't anything big. "It was $11, Walter said. And that's what made it big." She didn't know how to respond to that. "I've spent my life building things," he continued. "Warehouses, fleets, networks. I know how to move freight across states faster than most people can move a box down the block. But I'll tell you something, nothing I've built has stayed with me the way that moment did. Watching you give away what you barely had, that meant something." Lila looked down at her coffee. "I wasn't trying to make a statement," she said. "I just remembered what it felt like to not know where your next meal is coming from. That kid reminded me of someone I used to be." Walter nodded. "My wife," he said quietly, "was a single mother when I met her. She had a toddler on her hip and a part-time job at a dry cleaner's. First time I saw her, she was arguing with the store owner about staying late to finish someone else's pressing, because she needed the overtime. She didn't know I was there to pick up a suit." He smiled at the memory. She had this fire in her. This dignity. Like the world had taken everything, but she refused to be bitter. "That fire, I saw the same thing in you." Lila was silent. "I'm starting something," Walter said. "A program called Fuel First. It's aimed at providing free breakfast to homeless children across 8 states, starting small, expanding from there. We've got kitchens, partnerships, trucks, logistics. But what we don't have is heart. What we don't have is someone who knows what it feels like to be hungry and invisible, and still choose compassion." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the table. "I want you to come on board as our community liaison. You'd help coordinate with shelters, schools, and local kitchens. You'd talk to families. You'd remind the team who we're doing this for." Lila stared at the folder like it might bite. "I'm not qualified," she said quietly. "I've never run a program. I've never even had an office job." Walter didn't blink. "You're not qualified," he said. "You're chosen." She blinked hard, trying not to cry. "Why me?" "Because you didn't wait to be told what was right. You did what was right. And that's something I can't teach." For a long moment, Lila just breathed. It didn't feel real. It felt like something out of a story someone else might tell, about the girl who was just doing her job one day and got offered a mission the next. But there was a stillness in Walter's eyes that steadied her. This wasn't charity. This was trust. She opened the folder and skimmed the documents. Nothing complicated, just outlines, goals, contacts. She saw the logo at the top, Fuel First. The name was simple. The purpose even simpler. "You want me to help feed kids," she said softly. "I want you to help lead us in feeding them," Walter corrected. "Because you already know what hungry looks like. And because you were brave enough to do something about it, when no one asked you to. Lila looked out the window for a moment. The world outside kept moving. But something inside her had paused, not with fear, but with clarity. She didn't have a degree. She didn't have connections. But she had memory. She had heart. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. She turned back to Walter and nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." 3 months later, the glass jar sat on the folding table at the front of the shelter, catching light from the skylight above. It wasn't fancy, just a wide-mouthed mason jar with a hand-lettered sign taped to it. But unlike the jar Lila used to keep under the register at Mel's Diner, this one didn't say tip. This one read, "Pass it on." The letters were thick and bold, drawn with a blue Sharpie, a little uneven. But the message was clear. It wasn't about giving because you had extra. It was about giving because you remembered what it felt like to have nothing. The launch event for Fuel First had drawn a bigger crowd than expected. Families lined up in the parking lot 2 hours before breakfast began. Volunteers handed out eggs, oatmeal, fresh fruit, simple meals, made with care. Children clutched juice boxes and packets of raisins like they were gifts. Lila moved between tables with the comfort of someone who knew both sides of the story. She greeted mothers with tired eyes and cracked voices. She high-fived toddlers with sticky fingers. She made sure everyone who came in was met with dignity, no judgment, no forms, no red tape. Just food. Just welcome. The air inside the temporary dining room was warm with noise, not chaotic, but full. The kind of fullness that comes from something real being shared. A few reporters stood by the exit, snapping photos and jotting quotes, but Lila hardly noticed. Her attention was on the families. Her people. Near the front, just beside the check-in table, the jar waited. It wasn't required. No one was asked to give. But something about it, the simplicity, the invitation, drew people in. A teenager dropped in 3 crumpled ones. An elderly man placed 2 quarters inside and murmured, "For the next guy." A little girl unwrapped a lollipop and tucked it gently beside the bills. And then, just as the last round of breakfast trays went out, Lila saw her. The young mother from the diner. She looked different now. Her clothes were still plain, but cleaner, newer. Her hair was pulled back, and there was a steadiness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. On her hip, the same little boy, now a little taller, a little heavier, clung to her like before. But he was smiling. Full-cheeked and bright-eyed, like he'd grown 3 months of safety into his frame. The woman walked straight to the jar. Lila didn't say anything. She just watched. The mother reached into her purse and pulled out a folded $5 bill. It wasn't new, the edges were soft and bent, but it was carefully flattened. She placed it into the jar, gently, like it meant more than its number. Then she looked up and met Lila's eyes. "Someone fed me when I couldn't," she said softly. "It's my turn now." Lila didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened. Her chest ached in the way it does when you realize something good has come full circle. She walked over, resting a hand lightly on the edge of the table. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," the woman replied. "That's why I did." They stood there for a moment, quiet among the clatter and voices and smells of warm food. Then the little boy reached out toward the jar, fascinated by the way the paper money floated among the coins. Lila bent down and handed him a sticker from her pocket, a small smiley face, yellow and bright. "Thanks for helping," she whispered to him. He grinned and pressed the sticker onto the side of the jar. The mother chuckled. "Guess he's starting early." As they turned to find seats, Lila looked around the room. So much had changed. Just months ago, she'd been working doubles, scraping together rent, giving away tips and hoping they'd make a difference. Now she stood in a shelter filled with full bellies and second chances, not because she'd chased some grand mission, but because she had acted on one small instinct. To care. She glanced back at the jar, no longer hers, not really. It belonged to the ones who had given, the ones who had received, the ones who would come next. Pass it on. She whispered the words to herself like a prayer. Then she got back to work. There's a belief that generosity belongs to the rich, that only those who have abundance are in a position to give. But life, when you look closely, tells a different story. More often than not, the people who give the most are not the ones with the fullest wallets, but the ones who know what emptiness feels like. They're the ones who remember counting coins before a grocery run, or skipping meals so their kids could eat. They understand in their bones that a warm meal is more than food, it's hope. That a soft voice at the right moment can sound louder than 1,000 shouted sermons. Lila didn't give because she had extra. She gave because she had enough, and because she had memory. When she handed that $11 to a mother she didn't know, she wasn't acting out of guilt or pity. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply recognized herself in another person's struggle. She gave because someone once might have done the same for her. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe that's exactly why she knew how much it mattered. The moral here isn't about charity. It's about connection. We often measure worth by what people have: titles, savings, resumes. But what if we measured people by what they give? Not in dollars or donations, but in heart, in presence, in courage. Because it takes courage to give when you're not sure how much you'll have left after. It takes courage to say, I may not have much, but you won't go without today, not on my watch. There's a sacredness in that. You see, when someone who has everything gives, it can be kind. It can be generous. But when someone who has almost nothing reaches into their own scarcity and still chooses to give, that's something divine. That's what Lila did. And the ripple from that act, that quiet moment no bigger than a handful of bills, changed more than just one meal. It inspired something larger. A man who had built empires saw something he couldn't calculate in spreadsheets, a soul choosing to give even when she didn't have to. That's what moved Walter Breckman. Not the dollar amount. Not the gesture alone. But the why behind it. Because deep giving doesn't begin in the bank. It begins in the heart. Lila's story reminds us that we are all capable of being someone else's miracle. We don't need to be wealthy. We don't need to be perfect. We only need to be willing to see someone else's need and not turn away. And in that moment, when we offer what little we can, time, food, patience, kindness, we affirm something vital, that no one is invisible. That someone matters. So the next time you wonder if what you have is too small to make a difference, remember this. A few dollars from a tip jar became the seed of a statewide movement. A simple act of kindness built a bridge between strangers. And one woman's memory of hardship became the light that led others out of their own. Because no one is too poor to give. And sometimes, the ones who have the least, give the most. Not because they want to be heroes, but because they remember what it feels like to have nothing, and they never want anyone else to feel that way again. That's not just generosity. What do you have to give? She answered with something deeper. Not wealth. Not status. But memory. She didn't pause to calculate. She didn't hesitate to wonder if anyone was watching. She saw someone in need, and she reached into her own scarcity, not because it was easy, but because she knew what hunger felt like. Not just the kind that gnaws at your stomach, but the kind that hollows out your spirit. She gave because she remembered. And that's what made it powerful. That's what made it real. Because at the end of the day, true generosity doesn't come from abundance. It comes from empathy. From lived experience. From the brave decision to let your past fuel someone else's future. She didn't share her tip because she had extra. She shared it because she remembered what empty feels like. If you've ever thought that a jar of spare change couldn't really make a difference, think again. Sometimes, the smallest thing you give today becomes the last bit of hope someone is holding on to. Sometimes, what you give is more than money, it's dignity. It's warmth. It's a reason to keep going. So if this story moved you, even just a little, don't let it stop here. Like this video. When was the last time you gave something small, and received something greater in return? Because kindness doesn't end with one act. It begins there. Pass it on.